uncle said the Tennessee Valley Authority drowned 3 towns to make Kinter Lake, and that on dry years you could still snag a steeple if you weren't watching your line. I never snagged a steeple, but I did learn the drowned roadbeds the way old men learn the good booths at the diner, where to park the boat when the wind falls off, where the crappie like to suspend when the sun is mean. That July the bank stepped down like a map, roots showing, clay cracked into plates. You could walk out where you usually float and find tire tracks fossilized in mud, and a stop sign as tall as your knee staring up like a question you forgot to answer. On the 4th, the lake belongs to speakers and beer. After the fireworks, it belongs to the ones who like quiet. I was one of those. Around midnight, I cut the outboard and let my aluminum skiff rock until there was no rock left. The surface went to glass, the kind of flat that makes you feel hung in something instead of floating on it. The depth finder read 20 feet over the old roadbed, and I could see a pale stripe down there the way a hand can feel a scar in the dark. The lights came on under us like someone had flicked a switch in a place the TVA forgot to gut. Not bright, not blue like LEDs, pale ovals, 3 of them, sliding in a line along the drowned asphalt, slow and deliberate like headlights under ice. I told myself about fishermen, but there was no motor hum, no lantern glow on the air, no carb smell. The ovals paused under my hull and my boat trembled as if a bass had thumped its side, only there was no sound. Just the tremble running up into my feet like when someone drums their fingers on the table you're leaning on. Okay, I said to nobody, and reached for the anchor line. When the rope came up, it was black and slick and smelled like basements. The ovals drifted toward the drop-off. The depth finder blinked 18, then 12, then 6 in a stutter that didn't match the terrain I knew. A bell clanged somewhere, nothing floats. A buoy call with no buoy to own it. I thumbed the starter, and the motor coughed like an old smoker waking up angry. The ovals kept pace beside me, not fast or slow, just with, until the finder threw up a blank screen entirely, like it didn't want to lie or tell me the truth. At the mouth of Blue Jay Cove, the ovals veered and sank into leaf shadows without a ripple. In daylight, you can call anything ordinary and be believed. I brought my uncle out the next morning to call it that. Carp, he said before seeing anything, because a man who's decided doesn't need evidence. We anchored where the drowned road T-bones the old county route. The water was no longer a window. It was a green lid. Carp swirled in the shallows, their lips making that sound like someone kissing their teeth. On the exposed clay by the willow line, footprints led from the water to the tree line. They were not bare, not boot, more like the midsoles of cheap rubber shoes, flat and oval. They were spaced too far apart for a stroll. The climb marks on the bank suggested knees didn't exist. Where the prints reached the blackberries, they stopped. The canes didn't part. No berry was crushed. My uncle said someone came along later and swept them with a branch. He said it too quickly, like he wanted the words between us instead of silence. For a while, I didn't go out at night. The lake in the dark is an honest lake. It will tell you how small you are with or without help. But bait shop talk runs on nights, and I miss the feeling of the motor going quiet and the world replacing its own noise. Late in August, a storm line pushed east and left the lake licked clean and windless a few hours before dawn. I took the skiff. I told myself I was going for catfish. I anchored at the same spot because humans are cruel to themselves like that. 2 hours and a thermos later, the lights came back. Not under me. Off to the right, parallel to shore, moving like a slow patrol. They passed under the dock at what used to be Osteen's campground, with no reaction from the dogs up the hill, which is not how light works or dogs. They stopped in front of the old highway's curve and spread apart the way cars do when someone's getting out to open a gate. I knew what the old road used to do there. It cut across a low field to a little white church with no basement because floodplain. The TVA didn't argue with floodplain. They just added water. The ovals held steady like they were aimed at an intersection, not a lake. A bass boat crept out from Cedar Point, trolling, motor whining. The man up front wore a headlamp, its cone jerking at whatever his rod needed. He didn't see the ovals, or if he did, he filed them under lake things you don't get paid extra to explain. He passed between me and the ovals, and his wake went sideways, like something had put a hand under it. He looked back once over his shoulder in that way people look when their bodies know something their brain refuses, and then he kept on, because what else does a man do before daylight with a tournament on? I raised anchor slow and let myself drift toward the cove where the ovals had gone the first time. My depth finder decided to work again. It painted a neat story. 18 feet over the road, 24 at the drop, 11 at the mouth. When the finder said 11, the water under the bow took on that look small rivers get in winter when ice is thin enough to pretend it's water. The ovals appeared under the bow without travel time. Just there. The boat trembled again, the trembling becoming a rhythm like a pulse. A bell clanged far off at a cadence a person could march to. I leaned over and put my hand in the water because sometimes the only tool you have is your body being honest with itself. The lake felt colder there, the kind of cold that catches in the wrist bones. "All right," I said. "To the lake or to my uncle or to the people who imagined roads under reservoirs were still roads." I put the motor in gear and aimed for the widest water I could see and didn't look back until the depth finder read 30, then 40, then 52, where the old river channel runs like a vein. The ovals did not follow past deep. They drifted back toward where surface and bottom are friends. Come winter drawdown, TVA dropped Kinter like they always do and exposed the old boat ramp by the quarry. On a Sunday in November, hikers took pictures with their dogs on the concrete stripes of the drowned ramp like everybody had been there in the 50s. Someone had pried a street sign out of the mud and propped it against a stump for a Facebook post. I walked down the old roadbed with coffee and a bad idea. At the point where the asphalt disappears into water again, there's a seam. And at that seam someone had set 3 highway flares, not lit, just placed. Caps off and wicks clean like tomorrow night. They meant to make the kind of light you see from far away. A kid could have done that. A fisherman who likes mood could have done that. Or someone who missed intersections might have been practicing what it feels like to be seen. I didn't take the flares. I didn't kick them over. I turned around and walked back past a pile of sun-dried perch skeletons and a lawn chair, welded by silt to its own shadow. At the truck, my uncle called to say the forecast had rain all week and maybe the lake would be a lake again by Friday. "Good," I said. "It wants to be." He asked if I'd caught anything that summer worth keeping. I told him yes, even if I hadn't. When people tell Defy's explanation, they usually mean they want the explanation to be television. They want something with teeth or a law of physics that forgot itself. Mine is duller. The lights under Kinter move like someone still believes in the map that used to be here. That belief calls in the water answers in its own way. It's not weird to want the shortest route home. It's not weird to light it up so you don't lose your place. What's strange is how long that wanting can hang around after the road's gone, and how quickly a man in a boat will understand he's not the one being guided. I drove nights for the county clinic the fall the river ate the guardrails on Larkin's Hollow Road. The lab liked me because I didn't complain about overtime, and I liked the job because the miles after midnight were quiet. No school buses, no quarry trucks, just my little hatchback and a crate of vials buckled into the passenger seat. Larkin saved 10 minutes between the outpost in Briery and the hospital in Pine Ridge. After the flood, the county posted local traffic-only signs and set orange barrels where the shoulder had peeled away. But the asphalt itself was fine if you kept your wheels between the cracks and respected the blind curves. Near the end of September, evening temperatures slipped enough to pull fog out of the creek. It didn't roll. It gathered, low and heavy, a white belt that made my high beams feel dull. I knew the road by smell anyway. Wet leaves, iron from the water, that sweet rot when a log piled down in the hollow went anaerobic. I kept it at 30 and watched for deer. The first time I saw it, I read stalled pickup before my brain had proper evidence. There was a rectangle of darker darkness off the right shoulder, tailgate looking, and a shape behind it that looked like a man bent over the bed. I eased off the gas and let the car crawl, window down, wipers complaining at the drizzle. No engine tick, no exhaust, no hazard lights. Just the creek throwing itself at rock and a clack somewhere ahead. Metal on metal like a latch playing with itself. "Y'all okay?" I called. Because that's what you do around here, nothing. Then 3 soft knocks on the roof of my car from the passenger side. The side where the road fell straight to the water. A knuckle can make a polite noise when it wants to. My hand went to the door lock and made sure what was already true. I didn't look right. I looked forward. The rectangle resolved into tarps strung from saplings, reflective tape on their corners. A folding table canted at a bad angle half in the ditch. Someone had built a checkpoint like they'd seen on TV and then thought better of it. I put the car in first and let the clutch out slow. The knocks didn't repeat. In the rear view, the tarps unstitched into fog and tree and nothing. At the hospital, I told the door guard because old men like having something to dispute. He said that road brought out pranksters every flood year. At the clinic in Briery 2 nights later, I asked if anyone had heard about scrappers setting up a chop shop in the hollow. The phlebotomist said scrappers are loud by definition. Whatever I'd run into was quiet. A week went by. The county added more barrels and a sawhorse where the blacktop buckled. I took the hollow anyway because 10 minutes is 10 minutes and my boss liked prompt. It was a Tuesday, steady rain, no wind. At the turn where a sycamore grows sideways out of the bank, my lights picked up a reflective triangle nailed to a post. Detour, arrow right. I braked out of habit and then remembered there's no right to take there, just a logging track decades grown over. The arrow pointed into brush like a joke. I rolled past and that's when the road got busy in a way roads shouldn't after midnight. Tire hiss multiple. The kind noise makes when there's more than one source and your ears can't sort it yet. My mirror flashed 2 pale ovals, the size and spacing of headlights but blunted, like blankets over lamps. No engine behind them. The ovals slid left and right as if negotiating the center line. Up ahead through the fog, the world narrowed into a rectangle again. The folding table was back, level this time, with something like coolers stacked on it. White-lidded, the kind fishermen use. Beside them, a sign cut from cardboard with a marker scrawl I couldn't read from the car. The ovals behind tightened until my rear window glowed. I lifted the handbrake 1 notch so the brake lights didn't shout and touched the horn twice. A human voice answered. Not words. Just a low hey in that tone men use when they're pretending to be anywhere but where they are. I angled the car toward the center line and feathered the clutch to give myself a slow crawl with as much momentum as possible. When I got 20 feet from the table, the coolers stepped backward. It took a second for my brain to flip the figure ground. They were coolers because the tape on their corners made them look like lids. They were men because legs cast different shadows than plastic. The cardboard sign turned with them and I read, "Free checks, community safety." My window was up, door locked, phone face down in the cup holder. The voice to my right said, "Ma'am?" This time it was shaped like a word. I didn't stop. My car is no prize, but it is low and stubborn and has a new clutch I paid for with a whole summer's worth of mileage. The table scraped my bumper when I nudged it. The foggy ovals behind me drifted left. The men melted into brush. The sign hit my windshield with a soft thump and slid off. I let the engine pull us through. On the far side, where the road widens at the drainage culvert, I pulled over and put my hazards on for my own heart, not for anybody else's benefit. The ovals didn't follow. The road behind me was just wet and narrow and private. I reported it to the county non-emergency line the way people here report the atypical, undersold, With a laugh ready so the dispatcher wouldn't feel obliged to write anything down, she wrote anyway. Next day, Sheriff Petrie knocked on my apartment door at supper time. The uniform was because he was already out, not because my story required cloth and badge. He said they'd had calls about folks messing around down there, and it had the shape of something organized but small. No van, no weapons brandished, no robberies, just arrangement. He was careful with his words. I said the knocks came from the drop-off side of my car. His eyes went a little unfocused in the way men's eyes go when they're fitting your detail into a set they already carry. He asked if I'd seen faces. I hadn't. The county closed Larkin's Hollow after dark the following week officially. Horseshoe barricades, concrete blocks, a paper notice yellow in a plastic sleeve. Erosion, do not enter. The hospital issued a route change memo. 10 minutes became 15 with no apology. Life got duller and safer. 2 months later, the road opened for daylight again. I had Saturday off and drove it with coffee just to see the damage in sunlight. The new riprap looked like a stage set, rocks too clean to be natural. By the sycamore, I stopped and put the car in neutral and listened. The creek murmured like always. The tar marks where tires shouldn't be were gone, but the saplings that had held the tarp still showed squares of shiny adhesive. It takes a while for bark to forget glue. In the wet ditch by the folding table spot, shoe prints had set in the clay and then dried like casts. There were too many to be explained by one prank and spaced wrong to be explained by drunks. They led into mountain laurel, and laurel is honest when it's been pushed through. No branches broke. No leaves were bent. The prints just ended at the edge, like the laurel had closed after mouths had opened. I stood there with my coffee going cold and felt like whatever the game had been, I wasn't a player so much as a piece that a hand had tried to move. Winter shut the hollows early. The first snow came wet and mean and killed half the sandpile budget in one storm. One night in January, I took the long way on purpose because the high ridge road had black ice and the low ground keeps heat longer. The closure signs stood at their posts, but the horse barricade on the briery end had been dragged sideways. Tire chevrons wrote an invitation over the salt-dirty asphalt. I told myself I was just checking whether the hospital's route memo was realistic, whether maybe spring could come sooner. I told myself a thing I could put away if it turned out soft. A quarter-mile in, the fog arrived all at once, the way fog does when water decides you're not supposed to see. Headlights diffused to puddles. The sycamore hulked out of the gray where it always does. Just beyond it, my high beams threw white at nothing, and then at canvas, and then at letters. The cardboard sign had graduated to vinyl. Safety stop, drug take-back. Whoever they were had bought a grommet kit or started using one. My hands got cold in one sudden wave that had nothing to do with winter. I felt the thing I felt the first night. Polite taps, the sense of persons placed where persons aren't supposed to be placed. I didn't hear engines. I didn't hear breath. I did hear the creak in my wipers and that same small clack of something finding its latch. I put the car in reverse. No big gesture, no spin. I let the tires kiss their own ruts backward. Usually a hatchback will complain at that. Mine didn't. The vinyl sign fluttered like it had something to say. The laurel kept its counsel. When my rear bumper touched the horse barricade where I'd started, I killed the lights and parked skewed across the lane. I called Petrie straight instead of the dispatcher. He answered like men answer when they know a number they didn't save. I told him I was on Larkin's Hollow, that somebody had dressed a lie up nicer than before, that I didn't see vehicles and that was the part that was wrong. He didn't ask me to stay.
He asked me to leave.
He said he'd send a car. He said, "Don't be a witness to anything but the time you turned around." I did what he asked. I turned the car and drove the long way. At a pull-off near the river bridge where cell coverage is honest, I stopped and watched fog rise off water made warm by the paper mill. In the rear view, the hollow filled with itself and then with two small glows far back in the gray. Not headlights, not flashlights, more like the reflective tape on the corners of tarps catching light that had no right to reach them. It is possible when you stare at a thing too long after midnight to give it edges it doesn't possess, so I didn't stare. I went home. I still drive nights. The lab still likes me because I show up. When the route runs close to Larkin's Hollow, I tell myself 10 minutes gained means nothing if the extra 10 cost you ownership of your lane. Men around here like to tell stories about cryptids and lights in the sky. I've never cared for those. The strangest thing I've ever met was a handful of people who believed roads are whatever you say they are, as long as you say it in the dark. If there's anything to be explained, it's the part of me that wanted to be reasonable about being stopped on a county road by nobody at all. I took the McAdoo Tipple guard post because night work pays honest, and because listening to things settle is a skill they don't teach. The Tipple was a rib cage over a dry creek, conveyors stilled, the little scale house locked with 2 padlocks. Because 1 looks like you tried, 2 look like you learned. My job was to deter scrappers and call if I saw headlights. Deterrence meant a reflective vest and a truck with a light bar that didn't rotate anymore unless you banged it with your knuckles. They gave me a handheld radio that hooked to county EMS in case I fell down the switchback or surprised a copper thief with fewer teeth than manners. Metal talks at night. It pings when cooled air makes it shorter. It sighs when a breeze pushes through the girders. It remembers weight and sometimes imagines it. My first week, every sound felt like a trespass until my body learned the grammar. The conveyors did a call and response with their wind rattles. The catwalks flexed like floorboards in an old house adjusting its priorities. The dry creek filled with glass frogs making that sound like a light bulb filament chiming after you kill the switch. One Thursday after a long dry spell around 2, a different layer slid under the clatter. Not words, cadence. The low hum of men who have talked like this for years, close and economical. Load-out conversation, rhythm that lives in backs instead of mouths. 2 voices, then 3. They didn't come from the scale house. They didn't come from the road. They came from under the grating I was sitting on, like someone had built a room beneath the creek bed. When I swept the beam across the creek, the voices paused, the way living voices do when light interrupts, and then started again behind me without having passed by me. I told myself it was radio bleed. The handheld sometimes picks up fragments from a county away. 42? Gate 3. Copy. I turned the volume off. The voices got clearer. Not words still, just more bone than air. I turned it back on and brought the static up to meet them. The static made them small. I called Sal, the night supervisor, mostly to make somebody say something dumb to me in daylight English. He told me the whole system had been de-energized for 15 years, and that ghost coal doesn't fetch $5 at the scrapyard. You're hearing frogs, he said. Frogs will tell you whatever you're willing to believe. He laughed the way men laugh when they're glad they're not where you are. Take a walk, he added. You'll feel better once you prove to yourself there's nothing. I took the catwalk over the creek. My boot soles left a clean path through the dust. Under the grating, the creek bed was a mess of slag and weeds and broken green glass with labels long gone. The voices walked with me, keeping the distance a person keeps when they don't want you to turn around. At the far end, the old shaker house loomed with its windows knocked out in a pattern so precise it looked grated. The door hung bridged by a chain and lock bright with new rust. On the chain, a tag with a printing date from 2 weeks ago. MRA site audit complete. Somebody came. Somebody touched it. Somebody decided the rules were written, for now. Back at the truck, I put in earplugs because sometimes the trick isn't to hear the thing, it's to make it work harder. The voices came up like a river through a cracked basement floor. filling the space I had tried to occupy with foam. I sat there pretending to write my log while my hands learned the tremble my boat would learn years later. A sheet of moth wings powdered the windshield. The light bar hummed its own broken tune. Near 4, a pickup idled at the gate without headlights. I jogged down the switchback with the bravado that only gravity can lend. The driver's window was down. I saw a hand on the wheel. Pale half-moons of nails, the forearm dark with hair. The radio in my chest pocket hissed, cleared, hissed again, like it couldn't decide whether to save me or witness me. "You lost?" I asked because that's both a question and a rule. The hand drummed the wheel. The engine ticked the way cooling engines do, even while running. The person in the truck said in the exact cadence of the voices under the tipple, "Gate 3. The words came without the rest of the mouth attached. It wasn't ventriloquism. It was practice. "There's only one," I said. "You passed it." They backed up without touching the horn. The reverse lights moved with a kind of choreography, like the truck had rehearsed this dance in a mirror. The taillights glowed on the gate chain. The new rust looked like old blood for half a second, and I laughed at myself out loud because it was cheaper than letting the image rent space. They left. The night went thin and easy again for 20 minutes, the way it always does before dawn. When I climbed back up, wet ovals decorated the dust on the catwalk where no wet had fallen. Shoe halos, edges crisp. The centers blotted like a rag had been pressed and lifted. They ran from the creek toward the scale house and stopped one step shy of the door. The door was intact. The padlocks closed. The hasp firm, inside the computer that hadn't been powered in a decade, woke its little screen and cycled through old entries. Weight in 68,050, truck 12, date 05/14/2004. The numbers blinked to the next line like someone was tabbing through a shift report. I put my hand on the monitor and felt nothing. Sal arrived 20 minutes early, breath white, bravado bigger. He put his hand on the monitor too and declared it warm, because men prefer certainty, even when it means lying to themselves at 5 in the morning. I left my badge on the desk that Saturday without waiting for my 2 weeks. They didn't make me finish the shift. Sal said he'd mail my last check, which means he'd hand it to me at the grocery store, because that's how mail works here. For months I avoided the road past McAdoo. In spring, a company out of Louisville stripped the tipple down to its bolts and carried it away in neat segments, like a butcher taking apart a carcass. They left the foundations because concrete has patience. Sometimes at night when I'm driving the ridge and my radio catches county EMS, I'll get one of those bleed-throughs that aren't really there. It'll say the belt's clean or run it in a voice with coal dust ground into the vowels. I tell myself it's weather, or memory, or my own bones remembering the rhythm they learned sitting above a dry creek, listening to machines that forgot they were off. If there's an explanation, it's as unromantic as weight, the weight of habits, the weight of a shift that wants to exist even when the jobs are gone, the weight of not being ready to stop. After the tornado, the Baptist church in town swallowed what the county couldn't: bottled water, baby clothes, cots, and a wheelbarrow of mismatched shoes. I work at the feed store, so people know I'll show up when lifting is asked. Pastor Dale handed me a clicker counter and a pencil ledger. "You're tall," he said. "You can reach the top boxes." The sanctuary upstairs was honey-colored in that way old pine boards get after 100 years of hands polishing them. The basement smelled like wet hymnals and compressor oil from the line of borrowed dehumidifiers breathing like asthmatics. It was clean work, and felt good in the way tidy things do. The clicker said 49 after an hour. I wrote 49 and underlined it, like I was making a real mark on a real day. A draft turned the ledger to a page that shouldn't have been in the donation book at all. Deceased members, 1998. The names were thickly blacked out with marker. edges of letters still visible if you tilted the page just right. I flipped back to the present where cots and cans and dignity and cardboard waited. Upstairs, someone was practicing the same verse on the piano and stopping one chord shy every time, like the song was a jump you couldn't force your body over. I reset the clicker to 0 because Pastor Dale liked daily tallies, not rolling ones. I slipped it into my pocket to keep it honest. It clicked once. I hadn't touched it. I pulled it out, it read 4. I laughed and told the kid breaking down diaper boxes that he'd bumped me. He raised both hands like I'd pulled a gun. "I ain't touched nothing," he said. We put our heads down and worked. The clicker tucked away in cloth counted in 1s and 3s. I'd look and it would say 17. Then I'd count 10 blankets and it would say 29. After I wrote 29, it would say 31, as if to correct me. I locked the basement door at the top of the stairs to keep the flow one way. The piano kept practicing. I carried a box of church cookbooks, exact duplicates from kitchens blown apart, past the ledger table, and the clicker slipped out of my pocket like it had been waiting for the tilt. It landed on 46. When I picked it up, it said 47. It doesn't take much to make a person superstitious in a place where people keep photographs of dead kin at eye level and frame funeral programs like diplomas. By late afternoon, rain started up again and the fluorescence shifted in that way cheap lights do when line power flirts with itself. Pastor Dale brought coffee. I tried to hand him the clicker and made a joke about miscounting, but he held up both palms to keep from taking it. He said the last basement volunteer had wanted to be moved upstairs, and that he'd thought it was personality, not the room itself. Then he asked, soft as men ask when they feel foolish, whether I'd heard the piano. I said yes. The power, he said, isn't on up there. We both listened at the stairwell, breathing like men listening for something in the attic and knowing they'll need long faces later, if they don't want to be laughed at. The last note landed without fingers and paused the air so thoroughly it felt rude to move through it. We worked 2 more days. The ledger kept respectability. The numbers made the pastor feel like something had been accomplished. The clicker didn't stop arguing. It would show a number higher than my boxes, and then the kid would appear with a stack of blankets I'd missed. And it would add up after the fact like it wanted to be right about the future. Wednesday night, the storm sirens moaned twice and then died. Not out of danger, just out of batteries. I slept at the church because there were no windows in the basement and because my trailer rocks in wind, and I didn't want that kind of truth at 2 in the morning. I woke to counting. Not taps, not mechanical clicks. Counted numbers told under breath the way a foreman calls off shifts to himself while tightening bolts. 42, 43, 44, slowed and soft, like the mouth wanted to be sure it owned each one. The clicker in my pocket answered with its brass throat soft and respectful. I wasn't asleep enough to be dreaming and not awake enough to be reliable. Somewhere above me, a drop fell into a bucket at regular intervals, because nothing is ever entirely dramatic, even when you think it is. At daylight, I brewed coffee on the propane stove in the gym kitchen and told the pastor I'd take a run to the hardware store for longer screws for the cots. He said fine, and pressed money into my palm like it mattered which of us did the kindness. In the parking lot, the kid with the diaper boxes showed me his phone. Overnight photos had appeared on it he hadn't taken. They were of the ledger entries from deceased members 1998. The indented letters visible like a carbon copy of a carbon copy. He swore he hadn't gone near the book. Swore on his mother, who was already mad at him for cussing. I told him phones harvest anything you stare at long enough, which is a lie that sounds true. We kept counting. People came in with bags and left with other bags. The ledger kept its sober little miracles. The clicker recalculated in my pocket. Toward the end of the week, a woman I knew from school came in with a box of baby clothes. Her mouth pulled thin the way mouths get when they're pretending the adult thing to do is not to cry. She set the box on the table and placed both palms flat on the wood without saying a word. The clicker went from 112 to 130 while my hands hadn't moved. I lifted the box. It was heavier than baby clothes without being heavier. Under the onesies was a church bulletin dated October 11, 1998. I pressed it flat. The names on the back were blacked out in the same tidy marker style as the ledger. The in memoriam page was gone entirely, as if whoever saved this bulletin had only wanted the casserole schedules, not the names that hurt. I asked Pastor Dale about 1998 because a number repeated enough becomes a knock at the door. He told me the church had a bus crash that year, out on the Gorge Road west of town. 3 gone, 2 broken badly, 1 never came fully back. He told me the basement flooded the following spring, and they had to rip out the drywall and replace it with cinder block, because you can't make a wall forget. Then he said, "We do potlucks better than goodbyes," and smiled because that's a sentence a pastor's allowed to smile after. We finished the week without anyone crying on purpose. The clicker ended one day on 199, and an hour later, with no boxes moved, it read 200. I didn't call that a haunting. I called it a room telling us what number it wanted to land on. When my shift ended, I walked up the sanctuary stairs slow and looked at the piano. The bench was in, hymnals stacked. The power was technically off. I could see the breaker taped over on the panel. I pressed 1 key out of pettiness. It didn't make a sound. The note that had landed itself 2 days earlier didn't owe me a demonstration. I took the clicker home by accident. It showed up in the cup holder of my truck the next morning, reading 3. I hadn't touched it. I moved it to the glove box where it gathered root dust and hardware receipts. Once in a while, when the feed store is slow, I take it out and count the men who come in for salt blocks. The ones who talk about the old bus route and how they'd fix the Gorge Road if anyone asked them. The clicker will jump 1 ahead like it knows someone I don't see yet is going to need something. It's not magic. It's a habit I can't shake and a piece of brass that keeps good time with a room where people came to be counted when it mattered in a way that wasn't statistics. After the relief center shut, the church put back the coffee urns and the folding tables became suppers again. Sometimes when the heat kicks on under the sanctuary, the floorboards pop and it sounds like a child running. The dehumidifiers rest in a closet, breathing patiently between duties. The ledger sits on Pastor Dale's shelf. The deceased members section dog-eared not by grief, but by thumb. There's an explanation that doesn't cheat anybody if you want it. A man with a counter in his pocket is more likely to see patterns. And basements keep stories alive because upstairs is too sunny for them. Down there beside a wall water loves. You can hear what a place thinks it needs, and if that's 1 more at the end of a quiet day, well, I've been that number myself more than once. If you want it more haunted, you'll have to borrow a different voice. My voice only has room for things that happened, and for the way numbers sometimes behave like people who want to be remembered without you making a fuss.